Dr. Alara Vance, 32, measured her life in lines of code and peer-reviewed metrics. High above the chaos of the city, in the pristine, secure labs of the Arcus Institute, she was the youngest director in computational biology. Her world was a fortress of pure logic, built meticulously to prevent a recurrence of the emotional chaos that had defined her adolescence. Her personal philosophy, her unshakable thesis line, was simple: trust algorithms, not people. Success came from controlling the variables, not engaging with messy, human emotions. She excelled in highly abstract, complex work, currently developing diagnostic software to model the cellular mechanics of extremely rare genetic disorders. The numbers, unlike the people in her past, were always honest. The rhythmic, low hum of the high-performance cooling systems provided the soundtrack to her controlled life, a perfect, unchanging white noise. Her graduate assistant, Leo, a young man who navigated Alara's lab with the caution of a mouse in a vault, hesitantly approached her workstation. "Dr. Vance? An urgent email just came in from the Triptych Foundation. They're requesting your specialized expertise for a high-profile, time-sensitive medical project. They cited your recent paper on chromosomal instability modeling." Alara's instinct, honed by years of self-preservation, was to decline. External consultations meant uncontrolled variables, deadlines imposed by desperation, emotional appeals, and compromised data standards. The Triptych Foundation deals in visibility, Leo, not rigor. Alara stated dismissively, her eyes fixed on her screen. "Decline. We are focused on core Arcus initiatives. If you're still here, welcome to Voice of Jenna, a place where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Here, we dive into real emotions, family drama, quiet heartbreaks, unexpected twists, and the moments that change us. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you what happened next." "But they specifically require the capacity of your algorithm, Dr. Vance," Leo insisted. He then forwarded the attachment, the executive summary. Alara sighed, her interest piqued by the scientific challenge itself. The summary outlined a desperate, last-ditch effort to understand and treat a rapidly progressing pediatric disorder that had defeated all standard medical approaches. The problem was a marvel of biological complexity, and it appealed directly to the intellectual architect in her. She typed a quick reply to Leo. "Schedule a preliminary video conference for tomorrow. Send them my terms. Data must be sanitized and strictly anonymized. No emotional clutter. This is a scientific consultation only." As she finalized the instruction, her eyes flicked to the bottom of the project summary, seeking the name of the project director, the person she would be communicating with directly. She needed to assess the source of the chaos. The name, printed beneath the formal foundation header, instantly shattered the glass tower of her carefully constructed calm. Director of Development, Liana Thorne. The name triggered a visceral, instantaneous memory, not of a sleek executive, but of a golden-haired, popular girl in Southwood High. A girl whose laughter had been a weapon, whose popularity had been a shield for her casual cruelty, and whose specific, calculated sabotage of Alara's early college application had been the wound that drove Alara into a life defined by isolation and academic overachievement. The bully was now calling the victim for help. Her immediate priority was transforming her bluff about a secured, time-released data package into a tangible reality. Instead of going home, where Marcus might track her movements or digitally compromise her network, Clara drove to the old, unglamorous neighborhood housing the independent auditing firm, Sentinel Integrity Partners, one of the companies she had named in her confrontation. She didn't contact them directly, knowing a formal approach would immediately trigger an internal legal alert. She parked blocks away, carrying only her encrypted external hard drive and the briefcase containing the printed charts of the harmonic resonance failure. She found a quiet, independent coffee shop with notoriously slow Wi-Fi, a place where Marcus's sophisticated digital net wouldn't bother casting a shadow. Her target within Sentinel was an old acquaintance, Dr. Helen Cho, a highly ethical, if slightly cynical, forensic engineer who specialized in auditing megaprojects post-completion. Helen was the kind of person who revered data integrity above all else. Clara sent a brief, coded email to Helen's private, non-work address, a communication channel they had used years ago for sharing highly technical, non-confidential research papers. Subject: Structural optimization paper. Question on resonance. Helen, I ran the cantilevered monolith problem per the old 2018 paper with the 1 in 100 environmental inputs we discussed. The result on the flexure dampening coefficient is concerning. It's showing a 1.20 factor under specific harmonic load cycles. The project is under immediate threat of optimization by the principal. I need a confidential, secure channel to drop the raw data for review and safe harbor. I'm afraid the integrity of the data may be compromised internally within 72 hours. Can you advise on a protocol that ensures complete anonymity until the data is fully validated? Urgent.
C.
The email was deliberately vague, yet scientifically precise enough to alarm Helen. Clara emphasized the flexure dampening coefficient, the core damper system, and the 1.20 factor, the 20% overage and sway, using the scientific language that signaled real, immediate danger to appear. Within an hour, Helen replied with a single, encrypted document attachment. It was a blank, heavily redacted non-disclosure agreement, NDA, and a string of characters, a one-time, anonymous upload key for Sentinel's most secure external vault, designed for protecting whistleblower data before any formal report is filed. The key would only be active for 6 hours. Clara immediately began the painstaking process of uploading the raw simulation data, the encrypted source code of the analysis tool, and a detailed summary of the unmitigated harmonic resonance flaw. She took care to anonymize the file names, but the content clearly pointed to the structural core of the zenith. With the files safely transferred and a confirmation receipt received, Clara had executed her contingency protocol. She was no longer just an employee with a secret. She was a legally protected whistleblower, albeit one operating in the deep shadows. She then deleted the email thread, cleared the browser history, and walked out of the coffee shop, the weight on her shoulders replaced by the cold, clear resolution of a difficult choice made. Now, she had to face Marcus's countermove. She had secured the data, but Marcus still controlled her professional reputation, her access to the main servers, and the public timeline of the billion-dollar project. She had bought time, but she knew Marcus was not wasting his. By the time she got home, she expected the first sign of his retaliation to be waiting. Alara spent the rest of the day and most of the night in a state she hadn't allowed herself to enter for over a decade, uncontrolled memory recall. The sterile calm of the Arcus Institute was suddenly flooded with the harsh, chaotic noise of Southwood High. The Liana Thorne on the screen was a sleek, perfectly packaged executive, the director of development for a major foundation. The Liana in Alara's memory was the queen bee, golden-haired, popular, and possessing a chilling, surgical skill for social cruelty. Alara, then an awkward, shy physics prodigy, had been her favorite, long-running project. Liana's bullying was never physical. It was an act of calculated erasure. She orchestrated lunchroom freezes, circulated cruel, elaborate rumors that destroyed friendships, and made Alara feel like an infectious variable in the school's carefully balanced ecosystem. Liana's ultimate goal was not to make Alara cry, but to make her invisible. This trauma fueled Alara's thesis line, that emotional vulnerability was the greatest risk a person could take. The memory that truly defined the wound surfaced with bitter clarity, the MIT scholarship. In her senior year, Alara had been a finalist for an extremely competitive engineering scholarship that would have liberated her from her impoverished, difficult home life. The application required a principal's recommendation and a peer interview component. Liana, whose father was a powerful donor to the school, had intercepted the crucial, sealed peer evaluations. Liana hadn't just changed the reviews. She had carefully edited them to paint Alara as unstable, socially erratic, and prone to emotional isolation, using keywords designed to trigger psychological red flags in the selection committee. Alara lost the scholarship. The rejection was polite but firm, citing concerns about her suitability for high-stress collaborative environments. The loss derailed her immediate trajectory, forced her into 2 years of low-income community college, and cemented her deep, abiding distrust of human beings. She eventually rebuilt her path, hyper-focused on science where emotional variables were banned. But the memory was a scar, an ever-present reminder of Liana's casual, destructive power. Now, Liana needed her. Alara finally took action, pulling up the Triptych Foundation's public reports and Liana's LinkedIn profile. The facade was professional, but the information was revealing. The Foundation's finances were strained. The medical project was described with unusual urgency, citing a race against time. Liana's own job seemed dependent on securing this breakthrough. Alara then used her superior access to scientific databases to run a search on the specific, rare genetic marker mentioned in the project brief. The results were terrifyingly clear. The disorder was progressive, usually pediatric, and often fatal within a few years if left untreated. This was not a large-scale research initiative, it was a personal crisis. Alara realized with a cold certainty the highly specialized medical challenge was likely Liana's child. The knowledge hit her with the full force of a moral dilemma. The woman who had deliberately crippled Alara's future now depended entirely on Alara's genius to save her daughter's life. Alara held the mathematical key to Liana's fate. She could execute the most exquisite revenge imaginable, simply decline the project, or worse, take the meeting and then subtly fail to find the solution. Liana would never know why she failed, only that she did. The temptation to enact this delayed justice was immense. But the years of logical discipline asserted themselves. She had overcome Liana once by achieving success Liana could never touch. To sabotage this project now would mean sacrificing her own integrity and letting Liana's chaos finally infect the one thing she held sacred, her work. Alara closed the folders. She would take the meeting. She would maintain her cover as the cold, brilliant Dr. Vance. She would treat Liana not as a person, but as a complex, messy problem that she had the exclusive power to solve, or ignore. She would not let Liana's past cruelty define her present action. This was her test. The conference room Alara chose for the meeting was on the 9th floor, far removed from the pristine silence of her lab. It was a space designed for human interaction, a fact she found almost offensively distracting. She arrived 30 minutes early, meticulously setting up the video equipment. She ensured her camera angle was low, placing her face slightly in shadow and emphasizing the clean, anonymous white space of the Arcus Institute behind her. She did not want Liana to see the faint, nervous tremor in her hands, nor did she want her professional fortress breached by any stray warmth. Dr. Alara Vance, the persona she inhabited, was dressed in a severe, charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back into a disciplined knot that emphasized the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She had engineered her transformation from the awkward, bookish girl of Southwood High into a cold, brilliant machine. The transformation was so complete that sometimes even she forgot the pain of the wound that had necessitated the armor. At precisely 10 a.m., the video link connected. Liana Thorne appeared on the central monitor, and the past slammed into the present. The intervening 15 years had smoothed Liana's features and replaced high school arrogance with executive polish, but the essence of a queen bee remained. Her blonde hair was a perfect cascade, her ivory silk blouse suggested effortless wealth, and her smile, wide and confident, was the same smile that used to precede a devastating, calculated social attack. Liana did not look like a desperate mother. She looked like a CEO closing a deal. Dr. Vance, Liana began, her voice rich and measured, utterly devoid of recognition. Thank you for fitting us in. I'm Liana Thorne, Director of Development for the Triptych Foundation. We're very excited, as your work at Arcus is, frankly, the only thing we believe can move this initiative forward. Alara's internal dialogue immediately began scoring the interaction. Tense, 10. Recognition, 0. Focus on optics versus patient, 8. Ms. Thorne, Alara replied, her voice cool and perfectly modulated. Let's dispense with the flattery. I require a detailed, technical overview of the challenge. I understand the project involves a genetic disorder requiring chromosomal instability modeling. My time is strictly limited to reviewing the scientific viability. Liana laughed, a bright, superficial sound, and the sound was another razor cut. Direct, aren't we? I appreciate the efficiency. Our previous consultant, Dr. Heller, wasted weeks on holistic patient approaches which, to be frank, were sentimental nonsense. We need results, Dr. Vance, and we need them now. The casual dismissal of another professional instantly echoed Liana's high school habit of crushing anyone she deemed inferior. Alara felt the simmering heat of righteous anger, but she channeled it into professional rigor. The initial brief was vague, Miss Thorne, Alara pressed. The subject is referenced only as patient alpha. To proceed, I require full, raw sequence data, the patient's full medical history, and most importantly, clarification on the urgency metrics. This disorder, based on the preliminary markers, is typically pediatric and rapidly progressive. Why this secrecy? We must understand the variable if we are to control it. Liana's composure finally fractured. She glanced nervously off-camera, her hand rising to touch her perfectly styled hair, a gesture Alara instantly recognized as Liana's physical tic when cornered. The urgency metrics are extreme, Liana admitted, her voice dropping. The patient is rapidly declining, and the secrecy is necessary because this is highly personal. I cannot have this in the public domain, Dr. Vance. The Foundation's reputation and my family's privacy are at stake. Alara leaned forward slightly, her face remaining impassive. This was the moment she forced the truth. Personal how, Miss Thorne? Is this a family member of a major donor? Or a Foundation board member? Your ability to secure funding and resources depends entirely on transparency with my team. Stop obfuscating. Liana sighed, a sound of heavy, defeated resignation. The elegant executive veneer crumbled, revealing a flash of genuine, raw desperation. It's my daughter, Maya, Liana whispered, the two words dropping like lead weights into the sterile, quiet room. She's 5. We were told last month she might only have 6 months left. The Foundation is a front for securing the necessary funding and expertise without alerting the media or the medical establishment to her condition. I'm fighting on 2 fronts, saving her life and saving my livelihood. Alara's carefully constructed indifference exploded. The bully had a face, a name, and now a vulnerable, innocent child whose fate rested on Alara's ethical decision. The temptation to deliver the most exquisite cruelty, to watch Liana fail, to let the past tragedy be redeemed by present disaster, was a powerful, seductive force. This is your chance, Alara. This is the calculus of cruelty. But then, the memory of the scholarship returned, not as an insult, but as a defining moment. Liana had tried to make her small. To deliberately fail now would make Alara small again, reducing her life's work to an act of personal malice, letting Liana's chaos pollute her science. Alara took a slow, deep breath, stabilizing her internal algorithm. Her decision was not for Liana, but for the innocent child, Maya, and for her own hard-won integrity. I understand the stakes now, Miss Thorne, Alara said, her tone hardening into a purely professional discipline. I accept the consultation under the following non-negotiable terms. These are not open for discussion. Impersonal protocol. All data must be scrubbed of identifiers and provided to my team immediately. My interaction will be strictly with the data, not with you or the patient. You will provide no personal updates or emotional appeals. Unfettered access. I require 100% control over the computational resources needed, regardless of cost. If I identify a therapeutic approach, it will be executed without delay or interference from your Foundation's board. Complete confidentiality. I will maintain your anonymity regarding the patient's identity. But if you, or anyone at the Foundation, attempts to interfere with my data integrity or delay the processing, I will immediately resign and report the breach to the Arcus Institute Ethics Board. She was setting the boundaries of her fortress, demanding complete control over the variables. Liana, relieved that the impossible expert had accepted the task, quickly agreed to the draconian terms. Agreed, Dr. Vance. Whatever you need. Thank you, Liana said, the relief evident but quickly masked by her executive persona. Alara paused, delivering her final, cold statement. Ms. Thorne, I have accepted this project purely because of the unique computational challenge it presents. I am a machine designed to solve this type of problem. You will treat me as such. Now, upload the raw sequencing data and send the authorization code to Leo. The clock starts now. She terminated the call before Liana could offer another word of gratitude, or, more terrifyingly, before the ghost of Southwood High could fully emerge and shatter her facade. Alara was in. The test had begun. She now held the fate of her bully's child in her hands, and the temptation of revenge would be a constant, corrosive presence in her controlled world. Alara returned to her computational lab, the pristine silence now feeling oppressive, not protective. The meeting with Liana had been a shockwave, proving that the chaos she sought to avoid had followed her to the very pinnacle of her achievement. The moment she confirmed Maya's identity, the professional assignment transformed into a high-stakes, personal test of character. She immediately tasked Leo with managing the incoming data stream, emphasizing the necessity of absolute adherence to the anonymization protocol. Leo, I need a clean environment. Every metadata tag, every identifying marker outside of the core genetic sequence, must be scrubbed and locked down. I will only interact with the raw chromosomal instability modeling challenge. Leo, still reeling from the gravity of the meeting he had witnessed, nodded rapidly. The authorization codes are functional, Dr. Vance. The Triptych team is uploading terabytes of sequencing data now. They seem extremely anxious. Alara's objective was clear. She had to build a glass ceiling of empathy over herself. She could not allow the memory of Liana, the bully, or the sight of Liana, the desperate mother, to taint her work. Her goal was to reduce the 5-year-old child, Maya, to patient alpha, a fascinating, complex computational problem requiring a solution that only her algorithm could provide. For the next 48 hours, Alara operated purely as the machine she had promised Liana she was. She spent grueling, marathon sessions deep inside the data, running parallel simulations on Arcus's powerful quantum-based servers. She was surrounded by screens displaying vibrant, complex three-dimensional models of defective cell division and erratic genetic expression. She was in her element, finding a certain peace in the sheer difficulty of the science. The data itself was chilling. The disorder was a rapid-onset form of genetic decay. The markers indicated an acceleration rate that was far beyond the typical prognosis Liana had quoted in the meeting. Maya did not have 6 months. If the data held true, she had closer to 12 weeks before neurological function would become critically compromised. Liana's desperation was not theatrical, it was tragically factual. The more complex the problem became, the more fiercely Alara clung to her detachment. This is not Liana's child. This is a scientific variable. To fail is professional incompetence. To succeed is purely intellectual victory. But Liana, the queen bee who had always specialized in piercing defenses, began her indirect assault, violating the terms of the impersonal protocol almost immediately. The digital fortress Alara had erected around her work started receiving anxious signals. Leo, looking increasingly stressed, approached Alara's workstation with his tablet held out like a bomb. Dr. Vance, Ms. Thorne is violating the contact agreement. She's sending non-professional queries to my personal email, bypassing the Arcus communications shield. Look at this. The text message was short, blunt, and painfully human. Leo, is she even looking at the data? I haven't heard anything. Just one word, hope. Is there any hope? Alara didn't look at the screen. She felt the familiar sting of Liana's attempts to manipulate emotions, even across a digital barrier. This was the same woman who had preyed on Alara's loneliness 15 years ago, knowing exactly how to apply pressure. The content of that message is sentimental clutter, Leo. Alara dictated, her voice flat. It contains no scientific variables. You will respond with a single, data-driven update and nothing more. Tell her. Raw processing is at 38%. No projections are available until the computational model stabilizes. Leo, clearly uncomfortable being the intermediary in this Cold War, sent the response. Liana retreated briefly, but the incursions continued. 10 hours later, a new message arrived, this time a pleading voice note, a violation of the text-only agreement. Alara listened, her face unmoving. Liana's voice was strained, thick with suppressed tears. Please, Dr. Vance, if you hear this, please understand that she's having a hard time. She's only 5 and she keeps asking me to tell her a science story about why her cells aren't working right. If you find anything, even the smallest indication, please. I just need a single sign that she won't be in pain. The voice note was a hammer blow against the glass ceiling. It revealed the raw, vulnerable mother, forced to explain cellular degradation to a child. Alara found herself staring at the 3D model of Maya's defective chromosome, seeing not just the data cluster, but the 5-year-old face Liana had described. The innocent victim was the antithesis of the bully. This is the test, a quiet, insistent voice echoed in Alara's mind. If you fail to help, you are not punishing Liana. You are perpetuating the cruelty. You are allowing the chaos of your past to destroy an innocent future. Alara recognized the subtle shift. Her thesis line, logic above all, was being challenged by a greater logic, the logic of integrity. To let Liana's child suffer would be an act of passive malice, defining Alara by her wound, not by her wisdom. She deleted the voice note without comment. She looked at Leo, whose eyes were wide with a mix of pity and confusion. Leo, Alara commanded, her voice regaining its Arctic composure. All communications from the Triptych Foundation are now filtered directly to a junk folder. You are only authorized to check that folder twice per day for new sequence data or technical queries. Any emotional or personal communication is to be ignored. I am working on a complex simulation that requires zero interference. Understood. Understood, Dr. Vance, Leo whispered, relieved by the return to military-like discipline. Alara turned back to her glowing screens, the 3D model of Maya's unstable genome rotating hypnotically. The glass ceiling of empathy was momentarily restored, but the crack was visible now. She had chosen to save the child, but she still refused to acknowledge the mother. The scientific challenge was exhilarating, but the emotional cost of holding her rage and her compassion in such perfect tension was almost unbearable. She had decided to proceed with the solution, but the temptation of sabotage, the ultimate, silent revenge, remained a dark, persuasive shadow in the corner of her sterile fortress. The next 72 hours blurred into a continuous, high-stress immersion for Alara. She lived entirely within the fluorescent glow of her lab, sustained by caffeine and the cold, relentless demands of Maya's data. Her glass ceiling of empathy was under constant siege, not by Liana's direct pleas, but by the devastating reality contained within the genetic sequences. Alara was attempting to run a predictive analysis on a therapeutic vector, a complex model requiring the simulation of millions of protein folding scenarios. But the algorithm was hitting a wall, a specific point of computational failure she hadn't anticipated. The genetic markers suggested that the instability wasn't uniform. It spiked during periods of high cellular energy demand, a variable that correlated eerily with human stress and emotional output. Emotion, the very variable Alara had spent her life eliminating, was now the critical, unquantifiable factor in her purely scientific problem. She cursed internally. She could model the folding of proteins, but she couldn't input a value for fear or pain. Her thesis line, that logic controlled everything, was failing under the weight of biological reality. She was exhausted, her mind sharp but brittle. She had been operating on 3 hours of fractured sleep, running the same complex algorithm over and over, watching the failure point mock her from the screen. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that without a successful predictive model within the next week, Maya's rapidly declining condition would make any intervention futile. She had separated the person from the variable, but the variable stubbornly refused to cooperate without the person's input. Leo, following Alara's strict command, had successfully filtered Liana's attempts at digital contact. The junk folder was accumulating frantic, ignored messages, attempts to leverage Foundation contacts, threats to withhold funding, and increasingly panicked personal pleas for any status update. Liana was thrashing against Alera's impenetrable professional wall. But Liana, the former queen bee, had not lost her ability to find and exploit a weakness. She was a master of social manipulation, and digital distance was clearly not enough to deter her. It was late Tuesday afternoon when the security guard, a burly, unflappable man named George who rarely left his post, appeared at Alera's lab door. He held a small, slightly crumpled envelope. "Dr. Vance," George rumbled, his voice echoing in the silent room. This was delivered by a private courier. Hand-addressed, sealed with wax. The courier claimed it was critical, non-digital data that bypassed all network logs. Alera took the envelope with a frown. It was a physical breach, a direct violation of her preferred digital installation. The fine, embossed paper, the elegant script, and the deliberate use of wax spoke of Liana's old-world theatricality, a calculated return to analog manipulation. She dismissed Leo and opened the envelope, finding a single, handwritten, 3-page letter. It wasn't a formal report. It was a desperate, unedited confession. The text was shaky, clearly written in haste and emotional distress. It began not with Maya, but with Liana's own fall. "Dr. Vance, I know you cannot answer digital communications. I know you view me as a threat to your professional sanctity. You are right to do so. I'm writing this because I need you to understand that the chaos you fear is already here, and it's not external. It's me. It's my life." Liana confessed that the triptych foundation wasn't just a front, it was a sinking ship. She revealed that her husband, a high-profile real estate investor, had recently been implicated in a massive fraud case. He had leveraged the foundation's endowment, Liana's life savings, to cover his losses, leaving the triptych millions in debt and under investigation. Liana, who had used the foundation for years to maintain her social status and wealth, was now facing not only public humiliation but potential criminal charges for misappropriation of funds. "I've lost the board. I've lost my home. My husband left me last week," Liana wrote. "I fought desperately to keep this project alive because it is the only thing I have left to sell, not to you but to myself. If Maya dies, I don't just lose a child. I lose the only reason I have to continue fighting this ruin. I used to think I was powerful, but I was just entitled. I was cruel to people who had nothing, and now I have nothing myself. I have no friends, no support, and I cannot even afford the hospice care the doctors are recommending." The letter ended with a plea that bypassed Alera's intellect and went straight to the dormant wound of her childhood. "Please, Dr. Vance. I am begging the best part of you to look past the worst part of me. I don't deserve your help. But Maya deserves to live. I see now that being cruel only leaves you utterly, terrifyingly alone. Please don't let my past cruelty define her future." This was the glitch in the queen bee. The woman who had embodied everything Alera feared, entitlement, social power, and calculated malice, was now more broken, more ruined, and more destitute than Alera herself had ever been, even in her isolation. Liana's punishment wasn't a calculated act of revenge by Alera. It was the natural, catastrophic consequence of her own character. Alera read the letter a second time, then a third. The sight of Liana's perfect handwriting, now revealing such raw, unfiltered agony, was jarring. This was not the queen bee. This was a desperate animal fighting for its young, stripped bare of all her armor. Alera felt the ice around her heart crack. She wasn't just holding the key to Liana's future, she was holding the proof of Liana's collapse. The ultimate revenge, to let Liana suffer, was now redundant. Liana was already ruined, and Alera realized that to stand back and watch the consequence play out would not be liberation. It would be complicity in a tragedy that no longer served her own healing. Her thesis line, that logic must remain detached, was being rewritten by the superior logic of humanity. She crumpled the letter in her hand, suddenly seeing the biological problem in a new light. Stress and energy demand. Liana's fear, her ruin, her desperate, silent fight, that emotional chaos was being transferred, biologically, to Maya, manifesting as cellular instability spikes. The variable wasn't merely present, it was a trigger. Alara rushed back to her workstation, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She deleted the variable for controlled environment and replaced it with a complex, probabilistic modifier based on extreme psychophysiological stress markers. She adjusted the therapeutic model, prioritizing the stabilization of the cellular environment before gene repair, creating an immediate, non-invasive buffer against the internal chaos. The simulation whirred, the cooling fans kicking into a furious, high-pitched scream. Alara leaned close to the screen, watching the 3D model of the defective chromosome. The red instability spikes, which had paralyzed the previous models, began to flatten. The graph of the therapeutic vector rose steeply, then stabilized. Success. The computational model had stabilized at 99.8% viability. Alara had found a way to save Maya, not by being a machine, but by finally allowing the human variable, empathy for the victim, and even pity for the tormentor, to inform her science. She had chosen wisdom over revenge. Alara finally stood up, the tension draining out of her body, leaving her shaky but resolute. She had the solution. Now, she had to face Liana, the ruined mother, and reveal the truth of their shared history. The act of salvation was complete, but the act of liberation was just beginning. The immediate euphoria of the computational breakthrough faded quickly, replaced by a cold, heavy silence in the lab. Alara had the solution, the 99.8% viable therapeutic vector, but the final, most consequential variable remained unsolved: the price of vengeance. Over the next 36 hours, Alara focused on converting the abstract model into an actionable, physical protocol. This involved generating the precise chemical structures for a non-invasive, targeted gene stabilization agent, a complex molecular blueprint ready for synthesis by a dedicated pharmacology lab. This task, intensely demanding and meticulous, served as a crucial distraction, a final bulwark against the emotional flood that Liana's letter had unleashed. As she worked, the ghost of her past self, the bullied girl from Southwood High, lingered at her shoulder, whispering corrosive temptations. The revenge thesis was seductive. You hold her ruin in your hands. You owe her nothing. Let her feel the despair you felt when you lost the MIT scholarship. Let her face the consequence of her own cruelty. She remembered the exact wording on the scholarship rejection letter, the principal's disappointed look, and the hollow ache of watching her escape route vanish, all thanks to Liana's casual malice. To simply withhold the solution now, to let her hard drive crash, to claim the data was compromised, would be the silent, untraceable act of destruction Liana had perfected. It would be justice, defined by the victim. But Alara paused, staring at the complex, life-saving molecular blueprint she had just perfected. This molecule was not just a cure, it was the ultimate proof of her hard-won competence. To intentionally destroy it, or to let it fail, would mean compromising the very integrity that she had built her fortress upon. It would mean defining her genius not by the work itself, but by the memory of a past tormentor. She would be allowing Liana, 15 years later, to still control her actions. She decided to break her isolation. Late that night, Alara did something unprecedented. She initiated a private, secure video call with Dr. Anya Sharma, her former PhD advisor and current mentor, a woman known for her keen intellect and profound ethical compass. Anya answered immediately, her expression warm but concerned, seeing the exhaustion etched beneath Alara's eyes. "Alara? You look like you've been fighting a war," Anya observed gently. "Is the triptych project that complex?" Alara avoided the direct truth, framing the dilemma as a philosophical test. "Anya, I need your advice on an ethical singularity. Imagine a colleague, let's call her Dr. Sigma, who possesses the sole cure for a catastrophic illness. The funding for this cure comes entirely from the person who caused Dr. Sigma profound, life-altering damage years ago. Damage that was never acknowledged or atoned for. If Dr. Sigma saves the patient, the person who inflicted the wound is saved from their own ruin." Alara paused, watching Anya's reaction closely. What is the professional, and what is the moral, imperative? Does Dr. Sigma owe the victimizer compassion? Or does the victimizer owe Dr. Sigma recompense? And should Dr. Sigma claim that price by inaction? Anya leaned back, considering the grim hypothetical. Dr. Sigma, by choosing to become a computational biologist, has already chosen her imperative, to serve the data and the truth of the science. The life of the patient is the singular truth here, Elara, not the emotional history of the financier. Anya continued, her voice gaining weight. If Dr. Sigma withholds the cure, she may satisfy an old wound, but she creates a new, far deeper one. The destruction of her own ethical compass and the death of an innocent. Revenge is a chain, Elara. It links the victim perpetually to the tormentor. Liberation is found in the act that defines your character, not theirs. Dr. Sigma should deliver the cure. The true victory is proving that the tormentor's cruelty did not destroy the victim's capacity for grace. The words hit Elara with searing clarity. Revenge is a chain. Anya's counsel confirmed what Elara's algorithm had already determined. The choice to harm was a choice to remain wounded. The choice to save Maya, regardless of Liana's past, was the only pathway to genuine, self-determined freedom. Elara was not just saving Maya, she was saving herself from the corrosive shadow of Liana Thorne. She thanked Anya, ended the call, and walked over to the secure terminal where Liana's desperate, handwritten letter lay, still crumpled but now oddly impotent. She flattened the paper, reading the final line again. Please don't let my past cruelty define her future. Elara realized the true meaning of the message. Don't let Liana's past cruelty define your future. Her decision was firm. The price of vengeance was simply too high. It would cost her the integrity she valued more than anything. The wisdom arc was complete. The act of salvation would be the ultimate, clean cut, severing the cord of trauma that had tied her to Liana for 15 years. She turned back to her computer, the last vestiges of doubt dissolving. She used the Arcus Institute's formal communication platform to send a single, professional, unadorned email to the Triptych Foundation's official contact address. Subject: Final Protocol Delivery, Patient Alpha. Ms. Thorne. The computational model for chromosomal instability has stabilized at 99.8% viability. The therapeutic agent blueprint and administration protocol are complete. The patient has a highly limited time window for intervention. I require an immediate, in-person meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the Arcus Institute's main executive conference room to transfer the full specifications and secure the necessary resources for immediate action. No delays will be tolerated. Dr. Elara Vance, Director, Computational Biology. She locked down the blueprint files, ensured they were ready for immediate physical transfer, and instructed Leo to prepare the meeting space. She needed to look Liana in the eye one final time before the transaction of mercy was complete, and before she revealed the long-kept secret of their shared history. She was no longer running from the past. She was preparing to close it. Elara left the Arcus Institute just after midnight, the city sprawling beneath her like a complex, chaotic circuit board she was no longer obligated to manage. She walked out of the lab, not with the triumph of a scientist who had achieved the impossible, but with the weary sobriety of a soldier who had just secured the objective but knew the war was not yet over. The final email to Liana Thorne, cold, professional, and uncompromising, had been the last line of defense before the inevitable emotional confrontation. She drove home, forgoing her usual utilitarian takeout for the first real food she'd eaten in days, a simple avocado toast, prepared meticulously. The act of making it, of engaging in a non-scientific, sensory task felt almost alien. For the first time since Liana's name reappeared, Elara allowed herself to look in the mirror. She saw not the armored Dr. Vance, but a woman with deep, dark circles beneath eyes that held the ghosts of old pain and the shadow of recent mercy. Anya's words, "Liberation is found in the act that defines your character, not theirs," had provided the ethical framework for her decision, but the execution of that decision required a raw, human courage Elara rarely had to summon. She was brilliant at complex data management, but utterly ill-equipped for interpersonal conflict, particularly one involving 15 years of unresolved trauma. She prepared her presentation with clinical detachment. The file was contained on a single, encrypted titanium drive, the breakthrough protocol. It included the finalized molecular blueprint, the administration schedule, the required pharmacological synthesis parameters, and, critically, the urgency metrics showing the extreme, rapidly closing window of time. She structured the presentation to be purely data-driven, a seamless wall of undeniable scientific fact that Liana, despite her desperation, would not be able to breach with emotion. At 8:45 a.m., Alara was in the executive conference room. She was impeccably dressed, her posture rigid, every hair in place. She had decided that her appearance had to be as impenetrable as her science. Leo was present, setting up the projector, looking pale and nervous, aware that this was not a typical funding meeting. At 8:58 a.m., Liana Thorne walked in, accompanied only by a stern-faced, middle-aged physician whom Alara correctly surmised was Maya's primary care specialist. Liana was dressed sharply, but the veneer of the queen bee was gone, completely replaced by the sheer, devastating exhaustion of the mother in crisis. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face was strained, and Alara noticed that she had neglected to smooth a sharp wrinkle in her expensive jacket, an imperfection the high school Liana would have found unthinkable. Liana's entrance was not the polished executive performance Alara expected. Liana stumbled slightly, gripping the edge of the conference table for support. She didn't offer a greeting, a smile, or even an apology for her previous breaches of protocol. She went straight to Alara, her voice a low, desperate plea that barely reached the sound meter. "Dr. Vance, please, just tell me, is the protocol viable?" Alara felt the intense pressure of Liana's fear, the raw, human variable that had almost corrupted her algorithm in Chapter 5. Alara's arm lifted almost automatically, not to embrace Liana, but to raise the wall between them. "Ms. Thorne," Alara stated, her voice resonating with cold authority, "we will adhere strictly to the agenda. I require you and the attending physician to sign the transfer of liability documents first, confirming that the Triptych Foundation assumes all responsibility for the synthesis and administration of the proposed agent, per the Arcus Institute's compliance policy." Liana looked momentarily confused by the sudden introduction of legal paperwork in the face of her child's mortality, but the physician quickly intervened, nodding professionally. "Ms. Thorne, this is standard. We need to do this quickly. Dr. Vance, I assume the core data transfer will follow?" "It will," Alara confirmed. "The protocol has a 99.8% stability factor based on the current computational model. It is the best chance available. But time is expiring." Liana signed the papers without reading them, her gaze fixed only on Alara's face, searching for confirmation, for a flicker of reassurance. Alara kept her expression blank, maintaining the scientific distance. "Now, the presentation," Alara commanded, clicking the remote. The screen lit up, not with emotional appeals, but with complex, color-coded diagrams of molecular structure and algorithmic flow charts. Alara launched into a concise, technical explanation of the solution, how the stabilization agent would non-invasively target the specific error in Maya's cellular mitosis, creating a buffer zone against the destabilizing psychophysiological stress markers Liana's condition had caused. She watched Liana during the presentation. Liana did not understand the science, but she understood the meaning: salvation. When Alara displayed the final slide, the complete, stable molecular blueprint labeled Vance Protocol, success, Liana simply lowered her head onto the cool glass of the conference table and let out a single, ragged, silent sob. It was not the theatrical cry of the queen bee, but the utterly broken sound of a mother who had run out of fight. It was in that moment of Liana's complete, raw vulnerability that Alara noticed the final, critical detail. As Liana lifted her head, catching the light, Alara saw a faint, almost imperceptible silver chain around Liana's neck, and attached to it a small, worn, high school friendship charm, a tiny silver calculator. Alara knew that charm. It was one of a pair. 15 years ago, Alara, trying desperately to fit in and believing Liana's fleeting moments of false kindness, had gifted Liana the other half of the charm, a small, silver physics constant. Liana had laughed later, tossing the physics constant into a trash bin in front of a group of friends, calling it irrelevant. Liana had kept the calculator, perhaps because its commercial value was higher, or maybe because it was a small, cruel reminder of the nerd she had successfully destroyed. But now, seeing it worn and scratched on Liana's throat, it was a tangible link to their specific, poisoned past. The sight of that calculator, that minute physical symbol of their shared history, snapped Alara's last sliver of detached professionalism. The time for the transactional transfer of the cure was over. The time for the emotional transaction, the settling of the 15-year-old debt, was now. Alara pushed the titanium drive across the table, sliding it until it stopped right under Liana's trembling fingers. "The patient is saved, Miss Thorne," Alara stated, her voice cold but steady. "The protocol is complete. Now that the scientific variable is controlled, we must address the human one." Liana looked up, confusion mixing with relief. I don't understand, Dr. Vance. What human variable? I will pay anything. Whatever fee you require." "The fee," Alara interrupted, leaning forward, finally dropping the Dr. Vance persona and letting the raw, scarred voice of the victim emerge, "is the full, unvarnished truth." Alara's gaze locked onto the silver calculator charm resting on Liana's chest. "Liana," she said, using the casual, personal address for the first time in 15 years, "do you remember Alara Vance from Southwood High?" The name hung in the air, a silent detonation. Liana's eyes went wide, not with recognition of the face, but with the dawning horror of the truth. The Queen Bee's carefully constructed professional world finally crashed down, forcing her to confront the ultimate price of her past. Her savior was the girl she ruined. The name Alara Vance dropped into the immaculate conference room like a stone into a still pond, shattering the surface of Liana's carefully managed reality. The physician, sensing a sudden, profound shift from the clinical to the personal, excused himself and Leo from the room, leaving the two women alone with the silent threat of the titanium drive resting between them. Liana's face went through a rapid, devastating sequence of emotions. First, blank confusion, then dawning recognition of the name from the past, followed by a gut-wrenching realization of the face, the same intense, analytical eyes, only now shielded by an armor of cold, untouchable success. Finally, the horror. The brilliant, distant scientist who held her daughter's life in her hands was the very victim she had deliberately dismantled 15 years ago. "No," Liana whispered, pushing back from the table as if Alara were contagious. "No, this isn't possible. You can't be. The Dr. Vance who wrote the papers, the one Arcus hired, that's not you. That's not Alara." "It is," Alara confirmed, her voice now completely level, stripped of both the academic coldness and the urge for revenge. She was simply delivering a fact, like a chemical equation. "The girl you called irrelevant in the hallway, the one whose physics constant charm you threw in the trash? The girl whose scholarship application you sabotaged to ensure I was labeled emotionally unstable?" Alara reached out a single finger and tapped the silver calculator charm resting above Liana's exhausted heart. "That girl built herself into Dr. Vance. I am the result of the chaos you inflicted. And I am the only person on Earth who can save your daughter." Liana gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. The memory hit her with the crushing force of a physical blow. The specific, calculated nature of the scholarship sabotage, the casual, thoughtless cruelty, it all rushed back. She had done so many cruel things in those years. She had forgotten this one entirely. The person standing across from her was not just a victim, but the living, breathing, brilliantly vengeful consequence of her past actions. "Oh, God," Liana choked out, tears finally breaking through her professional facade. She wasn't sobbing. She was hyperventilating, the anxiety of the last few months mixing with the acute terror of this confrontation. I didn't know. I swear, when I saw the name on the papers, I didn't connect it. You look different. You are magnificent. Magnificence, Alara countered sharply, was paid for by a forced delay of 2 years, community college tuition, and a lifetime of mandatory emotional isolation. You didn't just ruin a scholarship, Liana. You ruined my belief in human connection. You built this fortress. She gestured to the room, the institution, and her own severe attire. The temptation to rub the salt deeper into the wound, to list every small act of cruelty, to demand Liana kneel and beg, was overwhelming. But Alara recalled Anya's words, "Revenge is a chain." Alara pushed the drive closer. "You are ruined, Liana. Your foundation is bankrupt. Your husband left you, and you are facing fraud charges. I know all of this. I could have watched you suffer this, knowing your child would die as the ultimate price for your high school malice." Liana finally broke, pushing herself away from the table and collapsing into the chair, head bent in utter defeat. "I deserve it," she wept. "I deserve every single consequence. I am so sorry, Alara. I never thought about it again. It was a game to me. A way to prove I was better. I never understood that the people I hurt, they just disappeared. I never had to face a consequence until now." This was the confession Alara needed. Not the theatrical apology of the queen bee, but the terrified, broken honesty of a person who had finally seen the full reflection of her actions. Liana's pain was authentic. Her ruin was complete. Alara realized that the trauma that Liana inflicted had served as a furnace that forged Alara's success, while Liana's cruelty had been the first, fatal step in her own downfall. "I didn't decline the project," Alara stated, her voice softening slightly, the last remnants of the old resentment dissipating. "I solved it. I solved it because your daughter, Maya, is innocent of your sins. Her fate will not be defined by the calculus of your cruelty, but by the calculus of my competence." Liana looked up, tears streaming down her face, meeting Alara's gaze. "Why?" "Because," Alara said, her hand resting on the titanium drive, "I decided that being defined by grace is more powerful than being defined by bitterness. I saved the child. I did not save you. You saved yourself by finally being honest about your ruin." Alara then shifted abruptly back to professional mode, the conversation complete. "The transaction is finished. The data drive contains the full protocol. You have approximately 6 hours to begin the synthesis process at a secure facility. The physician has the administration guide. Follow it perfectly, Liana. Do not fail, Maya." She stood up, collecting her notes and signaling Leo to re-enter the room. She was leaving the fortress for good. Liana, however, grabbed Alara's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Alara, wait. I can't just take this. I owe you everything. How can I repay you? The fee, my life savings, when I get control of them, anything." Alara looked down at the hand that had once sealed her academic fate, and for the first time, she saw a person, not a weapon. "The fee is already paid, Liana. You will never, for the rest of your life, forget my name. You will remember that the kindness that saved your child came from the place you decided was irrelevant. Use the rest of your life to be kind to the people who are not currently convenient to you." Alara pulled her hand away, took the heavy titanium drive from Liana's grasp, and placed it directly into the physician's hand. "Go. Save the patient." Without a backward glance, Dr. Alara Vance walked out of the conference room. She had faced her trauma, delivered salvation, and achieved a total, clean-cut liberation. She had not only saved Maya, but she had finally dismantled the fortress she built, emerging whole from the shadow of the queen bee. The calculus of kindness was complete. 2 years later, the silence in the Arcus Institute was no longer oppressive, it was restorative. Dr. Alara Vance sat in her pristine lab, reviewing a new computational model for predicting protein folding, a project that was ambitious, complex, and blessedly free of any human variable. The titanium drive, containing the breakthrough protocol, now rested in a secure vault, a silent, powerful monument to the moment she chose grace over bitterness. Alara had changed. The fortress was still structurally sound. She was still precise, logical, and ruthlessly competent, but the walls were no longer quite so high. The emotional isolation, once mandatory, was now merely optional. She had started accepting invitations to collaborate, understanding that true competence sometimes required navigating the messy, imperfect world of human partnership. She even allowed herself the occasional, unscripted dinner with Leo, her formerly terrified assistant, who now viewed her with a mixture of awe and genuine affection. The fate of Maya Thorne was the subject of a small, discreet news item 6 months after the confrontation, a medical miracle. The Vance protocol had stabilized her condition, allowing her to live a normal, healthy life, albeit with ongoing monitoring. Liana Thorne's life, however, followed the trajectory Alara had predicted. The foundation collapsed under the weight of her husband's fraud. Liana faced financial ruin, and her once powerful social circle dissolved. She had paid the full, non-negotiable price for her past entitlement. Alara received 2 communications that marked the true, quiet epilogue of the story. The first arrived 6 months after the successful treatment. It was a formal, sealed legal document from an obscure, small-town law firm, addressed to Dr. Alara Vance. It wasn't a thank-you note, nor was it a payment of fees. It was a deed of transfer. Liana Thorne had legally and permanently signed over ownership of the silver calculator charm, the last remaining valuable physical symbol of her old, entitled life, to Dr. Alara Vance. The accompanying and signed letter was 1 sentence long. The fee is paid. Alara studied the charm, holding the small piece of tarnished silver in her hand. It was worthless, yet priceless. It was the physical closure of the wound. She kept it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that her freedom had not come from the revenge she craved, but from the mercy she dispensed. The second communication arrived 18 months later. It was a heavily watermarked email, filtered automatically by the ARCA system, but Leo had flagged it as potentially critical due to its origin, a new, small, community-focused nonprofit organization dedicated to providing job skills and resources for women re-entering the workforce after long domestic absences. The founder and director was listed as Liana Thorne. The email was simple, formal, and distant, a request for the Arcus Institute to partner with a nonprofit on a low-cost computational literacy program. It was purely professional, making no mention of the past. But Liana added a single, postscript line below her digital signature. P.S. I found my physics constant charm. It was in the bottom of a high school yearbook I donated to Goodwill. I wear it now. It reminds me to build things that matter. Alara deleted the email. She didn't respond to the collaboration request. Liana had to build her new life without the crutch of Alara's influence. But she smiled, a small, genuine expression of peace that had been absent for decades. Liana had found the other half of the charm, the symbol of Alara's academic pursuit, and was using it as a guiding light. The calculus of bitterness had been replaced entirely by the calculus of competence and grace. Alara stood up, walking to the large window overlooking the city. She was no longer defined by the chaos of the past. Her life, once a defensive fortress, was now an open, powerful structure. She had successfully solved the most complex equation of all, how to transform a lifetime of pain into a legacy of kindness. The equation balanced. The system was stable. 3 years after the day she faced Liana Thorne and gave away the cure, Dr. Alara Vance was fundamentally different. She was still a machine of intellect, but the engine now ran on a richer, more sustainable fuel than mere detachment. The Vance protocol had propelled her career into an entirely new orbit. She was no longer just the director of computational biology. She was a pioneer in what the Institute was calling integrated systems modeling, the merging of pure predictive computation with formerly unquantifiable, stochastic variables like environmental stress, emotional trauma, and sociological context. Her new research goal was the antithesis of her original thesis line. She was trying to build algorithms not to eliminate chaos, but to predict and mitigate the impact of the human variable. She was solving for the mess. Leo, now a respected junior researcher, often commented on the change. Your lab feels different, Dr. Vance. Still precise, but there's actual light in here now. The light was the absence of the shadow Liana had cast. Alara had fully achieved her liberation. The silver calculator charm, Liana's relinquished symbol of shallow prestige, rested in a simple, unadorned box on Alara's desk, a perpetual reminder of the cost of cruelty. It was a museum piece, a relic of a past that no longer held dominion over her present. Her work now involved frequent, complex collaborations, often requiring her to leave the silent sanctuary of the Arcus Institute and engage with foundations and government bodies. She navigated these interactions with a new, quiet authority. She didn't seek connection, but she no longer feared it. She found that professional respect, when untainted by envy or malice, could be a stable, useful thing. Alara often thought about Liana, now known only as the director of a small, struggling nonprofit focused on rebuilding lives. Liana was an enduring, unexpected case study in Alara's new research, a person who had suffered total systemic failure and was attempting a radical, grassroots rebuild. Her finding of the physics constant charm, the symbol of Alara's ambition that Liana had discarded, was the most profound and unquantifiable variable in the entire equation. It meant Liana was not only atoning for her past, but actively incorporating the value she once mocked. The final realization of the calculus of kindness. One evening, Alara sat at her window, looking out over the grid of the city, which now looked less like a problem to be solved and more like a vast, complex organism. She pulled out her old, battered notebook from her college days, the one where she had first scrawled her original, defensive mantra: "Logic must eliminate emotion." She crossed out the original line and wrote her new, definitive thesis statement, forged in the crucible of trauma and redemption. The true measure of competence is not the ability to control all variables, but the wisdom to choose which variables you allow to control you. The human variable, the capacity for both malice and mercy, is the most potent force in any system. Kindness is not a statistical anomaly. It is the most efficient stabilizer available to combat systemic chaos. She realized that the act of saving Maya had been an act of self-defense, yes, but also an act of profound self-definition. Liana had tried to define her as the unstable, emotional nerd. Alara proved she was the stabilizing factor, the one capable of injecting a necessary dose of grace into a vicious cycle. She had successfully balanced the equation between her past pain and her future purpose. Her life was no longer about proving her worth to the bullies who had judged her. It was about honoring the potential she had fought so hard to protect. She was an architect of stability, a master of complex systems, and the quiet guardian of a rare, powerful truth that the ultimate revenge is simply choosing to be well. Alara closed the notebook. The system was stable. Her life was finally balanced. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Voice of Jenna so you never miss the next chapter in our world of twists, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, the stories only get better from here.